So what's this? Another nerd making a video about Dark Souls. Well, sort of. I wanted to make a series about video games where I just play video games and talk about them. Talk about them more in a kind of in-depth, whatever comes to my mind, unstructured format. And I'm not sure how all this is gonna go, and I'm kind of shy about this kind of thing. So I wanted to start with a game where I feel kind of comfortable playing, that I know a lot about, that I know I have a lot to say about. I'm thinking a game that I find very easy, that I can play and talk and have interesting things to say about it. So I think Dark Souls is a good starting point for me. I'll play, at least the plan is, I'll play different games. Sir Beef. I'll play many games on this series, hopefully. I have plenty of things to say about games. I have strong opinions. I love video games. It's one of my 2 or 3 great passions in life. One of them is cooking, and the video game is another one of them. And it's one of those things where I think Dark Souls is gonna be a good starting point, because I want to get myself comfortable talking on camera in this kind of context. So we're making a character, and one thing that off the bat I really like about Dark Souls and Demon Souls and its derivatives is that when you pick a character, it's very flexible on what you get to be. They all have very different stat distributions, and they even start at different levels. So if you want to like min-max, you can pick a specific class and kind of focus on that. Like if you want to min-max magic, it's best to start as the sorcerer, because start at level 3 with high intelligence, and like a lot of your other stats are very low, so you get to directly start off in magic and really hone in on that. But if you want to play like you're not sure where you want to go, what direction you're gonna go in, Permanence is really good, because you start with like a pretty decent, like even stat distribution, and you start at level 1, which means your early levels are going to be very cheap. So you kind of get to experiment a little bit more. And what's cool is that not only do you start as a different character with different stat distributions, but you start with different items. For example, the warrior, as you can see, he starts with a broadsword, a shield, the armor, but he starts with no items. But if you go and play as the thief, you can see you start with a shield and your armor. If you play as a pyromancer, you have your armor, but you also have a spell, and you have your pyromancy hand. And if you play as the deprived, you start with nothing. And in the later games, I think too, like depending on which class you start as, you end up starting with different items. I thought if you started as a thief, you started with the master key, but I may be wrong. Or maybe I'm misremembering, or it's been patched out, but that's something I wanted to show. I don't know what kind of character I want to make, so I'll start as a warrior, I guess. Kind of good all around kind of thing. I want to do like a hybrid of dexterity and intelligence. So maybe thief would be better. Thief has good intelligence, has good dexterity. Your weapon kind of sucks though. It doesn't really matter, because that's the other thing I like, is that even though you pick a class at the start, and if you don't know what you're playing, you might think, this is going to pigeonhole you into a specific playstyle, but it really doesn't. It just basically dictates what you start with. So this is less about what stats you start with and more about what equipment you start with. So I think I really like the long sword, so I'll start as a warrior. It's gonna be really simple. Another thing I like is that it lets you choose an item, and you can use this. What's interesting is every item in here you can get while playing the game. All of these. There's none of these that are like unique to starting with these. But sadly, or maybe not sadly, depends on how you view game design, the master keys potentially. Oh, I see it says initial equip for thief, so if you play as a thief, you do start with the master key. So You know what? I'll start as Steve, and I'll get the master key, and then I won't pick the master key. I'll pick something like the old witch's ring. Why not? And what's interesting about this is the old witch's ring is pretty hard to get, so starting with that is going to be pretty useful. Whereas the master key you can kind of find decently easily. Then your appearance doesn't really matter, so we're gonna make a really pale guy with curly hair and have blonde hair. But yeah, you know, like the master key, what's really strong about it is that it lets you open up the map really early on, so you get to really spread yourself.
The world was unformed.
And what's I would say, like, one of the main things that I like about this game is how open-ended the map exploration is. So starting with the master key is a very good thing to do, because it lets you immediately experience how big the game is and all the different paths, and it lets you strategize about how you want to explore. If ever you struggle, you might try to go somewhere else to find different loot or things like that. I think it's a very simple character creator. I think it does what it needs to pretty well. You know, I like the different gear that you start with. I like the fact that your starting class mostly dictates your starting inventory and not really how you're gonna play, because it's very flexible. And anyways,
they came.
Dark Souls is not so complex mechanically speaking and combat wise to really differentiate the different builds that much. It's pretty crazy how loud this is.
Nito, the first of the dead. The witch of and her daughters of chaos.
I'm not really gonna talk about the story very much itself. I want to talk more about how the story is integrated into the game, but I'm still not gonna skip the cutscenes just because if you've never played Dark Souls before and you're like, I just want to watch somebody play Dark Souls, and for some reason, even though Dark Souls has been out for more than 10 years now and it's one of the most popular games of all time, I know nothing about Dark Souls, and I've chosen you, Beef, because I love you, to be my first exposure to Dark Souls. Then at least you'll get to go through the story, so I won't skip the stuff.
Witches weaved great firestorms. Nito unleashed a miasma of death and disease. And Seath, the scales, betrayed his own, and the dragons were no more.
Seath the Scaleless is the world's first race trader.
But soon the flames will fade, and only dark will remain.
Yeah, only dark will remain. Dark Souls was the last good game ever made.
There are only embers.
If you subscribe to certain schools of thought, maybe you might actually believe that.
Endless nights. And amongst the living are seen carriers of the accursed dark side.
The eclipse? I saw that a few weeks ago. We had a total eclipse in where I live, and it was really beautiful. Anyway, that's the introduction. To make a long story short, disparity did not exist, but then once light started to exist, it made it so things were differentiated, and all of a sudden, you could say life became what it is, and it became the new status quo, and now people are scared that the status quo is gonna end. And Go back to darkness, which is an unknown. Because even before that, darkness didn't exist. It was just the absence of everything. There was no... The concept of the darkness cannot exist if the concept of light and doesn't exist. Anyway, after all these epic things happen in the past, you're just some schizophrenic bum in a jail.
This is your fate.
Makes you feel very small and insignificant in contrast to everything else in the world. I think is a nice way to start the game, because if there's one thing that Demon Souls and Dark Souls is really about, it's the like feeling like an underdog who struggles and eventually succeeds against all odds. It's that sense of satisfaction of beating a greater opponent that I think really made people fall in love with this game. So I'm playing Dark Souls not remastered because I think the remastered looks bad. So this is a tutorial. You can read the messages and it teaches you how to play, and you know, there's a little guy over here that you can attack if you want to learn how to fight, learn the buttons and everything. You can see over here a presage of things to come. But what I like about this tutorial is that if you've played the game before, you know, you don't have to go through the tutorial. Like, you don't have to listen to somebody speak to you. You don't have to listen to prompts. You don't have to read prompts. You don't have to. You can just kind of go through and act like this is a normal level. But at the same time, you can tutorialize yourself if you want to. It's very non-obstructive, which I appreciate. Now, some people might say this level's kind of pointless. There's no reason to... This level is so like pointless that like upon replaying it, it kind of feels like a waste of time. But I think maybe that's a valid point. But at the same time, the level is so short that you don't need to. I don't think it's a big deal. Like upon repeat playthroughs, it goes by pretty quickly. Oh, I can't believe it actually hit me. And one thing I do want to start off with talking about is that I think a lot of the encounters in these games are very like you remember them, and this is how I feel about this guy actually. Even though you know, you can kill him in like one shot like this, what I like about this guy is that I remember him. Maybe it's because he's the first enemy in the game. It's very possible. But I remember him because, you know, there's something very striking about the hallway and the fact that you're unarmed and you have no way of protecting yourself, and you're being attacked by this guy with a bow, and then as soon as you get armed, he runs away. You know, it's enemies in the game don't behave this way, but he does, and I find that interesting. It makes him memorable in some way, and at the same time, you know, I think the area in which he's in and the way it's framed and everything, it draws your eye towards him, and that makes you remember the encounter. I think it's pretty well made as like a first encounter. Look at that, bathed in light, fell from the ceiling probably, like it collapsed, because he's the one who gave you the key to get you out of your jail. So you assume he was walking around on top. You know, he falls down, boom, hurts himself, and now he's dying. But it's kind of beautiful in a way. Like if I wasn't there, you know, this could be like a beautiful shot, you know, the light bathing the night.
Oh, you're no hollow. Thank goodness. I'm done for, I'm afraid. I'll die soon, then lose my sanity. I wish to ask something of you. You and I were both undead. Hear me out, will you?
Yeah, why not?
Regrettably, I have failed in my mission. But perhaps you can keep the torch lit. There is an old saying in my family. Thou who art undead art chosen, and thine exodus from the undead asylum maketh pilgrimage to the land of ancient lords. When thou ringeth the bell of awakening, the fate of the undead thou shalt know. Well, now you know. And I can die with hope in my heart. Oh, one more thing. Here, take this. An Estus flask. An undead favorite.
Thank you.
Oh, and this.
Thank you.
Now I must bid farewell. I would hate to harm you after death. So go now. And thank you.
The reason I'm putting the camera this way is because I want to show the dagger is very weathered. You know, it's chipped, it's got a bunch of scratches, it's kind of rusted. And that's something I appreciate about this game, is that every weapon in this game is kind of weathered and not in the best condition. You can hear him die. You can hear the sound of him dying. And they even get souls for it. And every weapon in this game is weathered. I think the only thing that the only thing that isn't weathered is I believe the legendary weapons. But even then, they might be. And it adds to like a sense of the world being lived in, and it's very like gritty and very kind of it's very gritty and very like I don't know what to call it, like very it just gives like a sense of place to the world, because like, you know, everything's so broken and dead and messed up. Like there's no way that you're just gonna find these like pristine weapons lying on the ground. This weapon is pretty weak, but it has the a modifier on its crit value, so when you do parries or backstabs, it does more damage than a weapon normally would, which is why if you can, you would want to do your parries or your backstabs. I think the backstabs are a bit too overpowered. You know, you have a lot of iframes and it kind of locks you in place. I wish maybe, you know, in a more arcadey fashion, I kind of wish that you could use backstabs as a way to create hit stun, but that they would be really weak. So in a way, you could use backstabs to kind of not hit stun, but like, you know, knockdown. So that way, like when an enemy is knocked down, it takes a while for them to get up, so you have more room to fight other enemies. So you could use that as a form of crowd control. I think that would make it a bit less OP, because as it stands, it does so much damage and it knocks them down. So it's kind of like a win-win, if you will. Ouch. This boss is very weak, actually. It's more imposing than it is strong. Like, I'm wearing very light armor, and the boss, you know, he hit me with like a really big swing, and it didn't even do a half my health and damage. It's more intimidating than it is an actual challenge, and I think it's in a way, I feel like it's to teach you that when you fight enemies, it's more about keeping your cool, analyzing the situation, being deliberate with how you attack, and not really panicking. And as far as the Zoro bosses go, I think it's an okay introduction. He's decently weak. He's got very strong telegraphed attacks, but you know, you're also, if you're not used to playing this game, you know, you realize that your moves are very slow. They're very deliberate. Like once you start an attack animation, you can't undo it, you can't cancel out of it. Some might say that it removes freedom, and I think in a way it does. In a lot of action games, you can cancel out of moves to do other moves and really have full control over your actions. But I think in this case, you know, Dark Souls isn't really about arcade style combat, even though it could probably benefit slightly from arcade style combat. It's not a full-on arcade style combat game. It's more about the vibes, if you will. It's more about how you feel when you're in combat rather than the actual mechanics of the combat. Now, there's enough depth to the combat where each weapon has multiple moves. It has a light attack, it has a heavy attack, it has a jumping attack, it has a running attack, it has a roll attack, which I think is the same as the running attack. It has a two-handed moveset, which also has all of these: a running attack, a jumping attack, a heavy attack, a light attack. And each weapon, no matter how similar they may be, for example, a longsword and a broadsword are going to have slight differences, not just statistical differences, but differences in their moveset, whether they do piercing attacks or slashing attacks, or if they have slightly more range, slightly less range, bunch of little things like that. So there is some, you could say, depth to the weapons, to the combat. And combat's a lot about positioning. It's a lot about well, I kind of want to show what I mean. You have options in combat. Now, does he have as many options as Devil May Cry? Obviously not. Would the game benefit from having as many options as Devil May Cry? I don't think so. It would make you too powerful, I think. So basically, you can lock on or you don't. When you lock on, you know, you can circle strafe around your enemy, and everything kind of points you towards the enemy. If you don't lock on, you have more range of motion. You can face away from the enemy and die. You can roll in any direction. It's not, you know, I'm kind of somebody who doesn't like a lock on that much. I think at first when you play Dark Souls, you rely on the lock on a lot because you want to make sure that you're facing the enemy so you can assess the threats properly. But over time, you realize that it's not really necessary. You actually have more freedom, and it's easier to get behind the enemy if you don't lock on. Of course, locking on will help you because sometimes like parries and stuff, like the direction in which the attack comes is important. So by locking on, you make sure that you'll always be facing the enemy. So you'll make sure that you'll always be parrying the attack in the right direction. But you know, the parry is it's a very like, even if you don't have a shield that extends the duration, pretty quick animation. And it's not like the kind of thing like in Sekiro where the parry is basically like a rhythm game thing. Like there is some context to parrying, and not all enemies can be parried. You can, but yeah, so you can lock on or not. It gives you a different range of motion when you do versus when you don't. Circle strafing is very strong, obviously. And I would say that combat's a lot about positioning and movement and being able to deal with multiple threats. Because in Dark Souls, since the combat revolves around, I would say, one-on-one encounters, like it's what the combat is best for. They trip you up by offering like multiple options. Not multiple options, but they trip you up by offering encounters where you fight multiple enemies. And dealing with multiple enemies is difficult because usually your attacks have not the biggest range, and your animations take so long that if you're attacking one enemy, you might get overwhelmed by the others. So it's really about positioning and about movement and about being able to kind of crowd control and just kind of guide the enemies to where you want them to be. And there's a few ways you can do crowd control. Like I said, you know, you can backstab. Backstab's gonna give you invincibility frames. It'll knock down an enemy so you get to focus on other ones while the enemy is getting back up. You can kick too, like this. And kicking is a bit awkward to execute, but kicking lets you like slightly stagger an enemy and push them around, so you get to control their you get to control where they are a little bit. And you can also break guard, which breaking guard actually staggers a little bit, so it gives you room to fight more enemies. I think the fact that it still has these kind of fundamental action game combat systems where positioning is important, and being able to crowd control and dealing with multiple enemies is important. And the fact that weapons offer different, you could say, like opportunities, like different ranges, different movesets, different things, and it makes it so that certain weapons are better against certain enemies. So it brings up potential for strategizing and planning. And you know, you know that like your weapon might not be ideal against certain enemies, but it might be very good against other enemies. I think it's very useful for how the combat works, and the fact that like stamina. You know, different weapons will require different stamina to swing, and stamina regenerates at different rates. So if you empty your stamina fully, it actually has a bigger delay to start to come back than if you only deplete a piece of it. And when you spend stamina, if you block, your stamina comes back a lot more slowly. If you walk and block, I think it comes out slightly more slowly. If you don't block, it comes out much faster. If you run, obviously it depletes. And so stamina management, I think people overestimate how much it adds to the experience. I do think it's important. I think if you don't manage your stamina, which is something that beginners might not consider too much. If you don't manage your stamina properly, you will get in a situation where either you can't swing, or you can't block, or you can't dodge, and then you'll die. But the thing is, even if you have very, very little stamina, you can still do an action. It's just that if you have very little stamina and you do an action, you'll just go back to depleting your stamina again. For example, you know, you can see here that rolling takes about a little bit less than a third of my stamina bar. But even if I don't have a third of my stamina bar, I can still roll. So you're not that much at risk when you run out of stamina to not be able to roll or not be able to block. The only thing is, if you block and it goes over your stamina threshold, you get guard broken, and it puts you at risk because it staggers you and you're in a more vulnerable state. And I believe you take more damage when you're in that vulnerable state. So combat in Dark Souls, it's pretty simple. It's more about the vibes. It's more about how you feel when you're in combat, kind of like those odds, but it's not fully vibe based. There is some skill involved. There is some positioning involved. It does have the, you could say, fundamentals of action game combat in there. So to progress, normally speaking, and this is something that I think the game kind of guides you well, I feel like usually you're kind of inclined to go upwards. So you might want to go upwards here and go up there, because when you're in Fighting Stride, there's many places you can go, so you'll be exploring and you might not know where to go. You can talk to this guy and he'll tell you stuff, but if you explore, you might come across the graveyard, which I think is something that you hear a lot of people talk about. Back in the day, people always said, oh, I went to the graveyard and I got my ass kicked and then I dropped the game, or I went to the graveyard and it was so difficult, I couldn't believe the game was this difficult, and then I just kind of gave up. The thing is, I think the graveyard, you're meant to realize that you're too weak. Like, you barely do any damage to the enemies. Like, this weapon is really weak. And when I fought the other enemies, it took like 3 to 4 hits to kill them. And here, the skeletons, I hit this guy 3 times and it didn't even do like a tenth of his health. So clearly, you're not meant to fight these guys. So once you realize you're too weak, best course of action is, well, I'm not supposed to go there. I think any reasonable player would think that way. And same thing for if you go to another path that you might find. This one's a bit more hidden away, but there's a path down here. And when you go down there, you know, it has weak enemies, but as soon as you go a little bit further, there's ghosts, and you can't attack the ghosts. And even if you use a curse to attack the ghosts, they end up taking very little damage. So you might think, okay, well, this is probably not where I need to go. And I think usually if you have enough video game knowledge, you're able to kind of make those inferences. But some people, you know, if they have less gaming experience, or they're not used to playing video games like this, or they're not used to playing these kinds of like action RPGs or whatever, they might think, oh, well, it's just a challenge and I'm supposed to overcome that challenge. And especially Dark Souls, I think sadly, I don't think it was part of From Software's plan, but for sure Capcom, who did the marketing, not Capcom, Namco, who made the marketing for the game, Bandai Namco, they kind of focus on the difficulty of the game. Like, oh, you know, this is prepare to die, you know, you'll die over and over again. This game is very difficult. So it gave people the wrong impression of the game, where, oh, this game is supposed to be difficult. So when you encounter the skeletons and you see that you barely do any damage to the skeletons, you think, oh, well, this is just because, you know, the game's very hard. You know, the marketing said the game was going to be hard, and the game's called Dark Souls Prepare to Die. So obviously I just have to persevere. But then you end up bashing your head against the wall, and it's a big struggle. And here, you know, I think it's pretty interesting the way it's set up. If you go to New Londo, there's these ghosts. And because they're ghosts, they behave like you would expect them to, which I think is interesting. They can go through walls, they can attack through walls, you know, so at a glance you can tell how they're going to behave. What you might not know is that they can stretch, but then as soon as you see it once, you're like, okay, I get it. And if you try to attack them, it just goes through. There's like this ethereal like swoosh and just goes through. So clearly, you're not meant to fight these ghosts, or there's like some way to fight the ghosts. And I believe NPCs will tell you about fighting ghosts. Like somebody's gonna say like, oh, you you know, if you ever go to New Londo, be careful, there's ghosts and you can't fight ghosts. But you can also just read the items that you come across. I don't know, I'm naturally curious, so usually when I find items, I'm gonna read about them. And here it says, temporary curse allows engagement with ghosts. Limit the victim of a curse. Temporary curse allows engagement with ghosts. The only way to fight back against ghosts, who are cursed beings, is to become cursed oneself. The safest method, however dreadful, is to cut off the arm of the dead. So, you find an item called a transient curse, like right here in a barrel. And then there's ghosts over there that you can fight. And if you read your items, you'll know, well, I can fight the ghosts now because I have the transient curse, which temporarily curses you. I think that's nice because inquisitive players or players that are trying to play with a problem-solving mindset are going to notice that. See this guy, you know, he knows how to deal with ghosts. He's chilling. He has no care in the world. He just is appreciating the beautiful view. And over here there's a blacksmith if ever you want to upgrade your weapons early. I will be talking to NPCs at one point, but I just want to kind of showcase a few things that I find interesting. Something else I like about reading the item descriptions when you find an item is it teaches you usually about how to use them. So anybody who says that Dark Souls is kind of esoteric, I think is they just don't pay attention. Even like stats and stuff. Here it says if you press the back button, you get explanations. And you get explanations on everything. It tells you everything you need to know about the game and about the systems. So it's a kind of an awkward solution, I guess. You could say, oh, well, the game doesn't teach you that organically, but I think most players, if they can either figure things out themselves, because if you've played video games before, you kind of have I guess you could say like game literacy, therefore you're able to understand the systems of games. This is why the master key is useful. Being a thief, I start with the master key. But reading item descriptions, the other thing is if you the way I think you're meant to play Dark Souls is you're on an adventure. You're an adventurer. You're lost in this great big world, and you're meant to survive and figure out what your place in this world. So you can go down here. That's a path. You can go over there. That's a path. And I'm kind of taking a roundabout path that I think is really interesting. If you know how to play Dark Souls, you know that like you're supposed to go up where I showed you to go to Undead Burg, and because usually you wouldn't necessarily be able to open that door, but I'm able to open it because I have the master key, and this is why I picked the master key. And if you know what you're doing, like in, let's say, a Metroid game or in a Castlevania Symphony of the Night type game, or in a more open-ended dungeon crawler games, you can sequence break. You know, and Dark Souls has dungeon crawler DNA due to Shadow Tower and King's Field. So if you know what you're doing, you can kind of sequence break. But I don't think it's considered sequence breaking. I think it's a non-linear world, and you can explore it non-linearly. And it's all about your little adventure. So this dragon, you think it's dead, but if you pick up the items, it wakes up. And I think it's really cool because if you're too weak to fight the dragon, and it's a risk to pass through, well, the developers, or let's say you do it accidentally, the developers added this little path over here that might not look like a path. You might think it's just part of the level geometry, but you can actually climb up here and avoid the dragon and all the threat and just go be on your merry way. Yeah, it's a little concession, but I think it works sufficiently. So anyway, to go back to what I was saying, you know, of course you get distracted sometimes. I think you're supposed to play this like an adventure, like a dungeon crawler. So in a dungeon crawler, items are very important. Especially if you play like a Metroid or Castlevania style dungeon crawler, which I guess you could say they have good dungeon crawler DNA, but usually progress is gated behind items, and most problems can be solved either with increased... wow, he instantly killed me. So you can learn how to progress and how to proceed with your items and your weapons. And by talking to people. So as an adventurer, you know, you're getting lost in this world. You have to survive. You have to make the best of what you have. So you really have to start being careful. Looking at you look at your surroundings. You pay attention to what you have. You read the item descriptions. You test out the weapons you get to see what their moveset is, to see if you enjoy how they play. I can't wield this weapon because I don't have enough strength. And so you're always kind of flexible, you're always observant, you're always kind of careful. And I think this is potentially Dark Souls' greatest strength, is that with the adventurer mindset plus the interconnected world and the fact that the mechanics are just complex enough, not complex, but just engaging enough that you don't get bored by the mechanics and the combat. You're always on edge, there's always something to be careful about. You're always going to be immersed in the world, and I think that's the best part of the game, is I feel like everything drives you towards immersion, because it's so dangerous, it's difficult, and the world is so big and connected that you can't help but, whether it's mechanically, it's graphically, it's because you're engaged in the story, so narratively, you're always going to kind of be tethered to the world. You're always going to be kind of interested by the world. You're always going to be immersed in the game and pay attention to the game, especially on the first playthrough. But even beyond the first playthrough, I think the game is fun to play, because the mechanics are engaging enough that you can replay the game just for fun and still have fun. I think the combat encounters are memorable. I think they're well designed. I think the game looks pretty nice. I think it doesn't have maybe when it came out, it wasn't the most beautiful game, like I would say, even though Skyrim has maybe lower res textures in this game, for example, I think Skyrim has, overall, the scale of the world is like masterfully crafted. So when you explore Skyrim, it looks really beautiful. And I'm comparing it to Skyrim because I think Skyrim, came out the same year, so you can compare them visually. But I think what Dark Souls does really well is atmosphere and world art direction overall. Not necessarily like, it's the best looking game. I mean, look at this chain. It's a 2D. It looks like a 2D sprite. It might be a 2D sprite, or it's just like a rough 3D. But like, I think there's sufficient character in all of Dark Souls' textures, models, and everything that it creates this like cohesive visual look that is, I find, pleasing. It's beautiful yet kind of dreary, and it's something that I think was integral to how they wanted to make the game, was to make a game that's they don't want to make things gross and scary. They want to make it beautiful and kind of what's the word I'm looking for? They want to make it look like it's, it says this desolate beauty to it, like because Dark Souls, if you want to say it that way, it's like a post-apocalyptic world. Like the world went to shit, and it's all like the survivors, everybody's crazy, and well, this guy's pretty strong, and I'm pretty weak, so you have to be really careful about it. But you're not really supposed to be here this early. So I keep doing partial blocks and partial parries. So because I have so little stamina and my shield is pretty weak, like that guy can kind of destroy me really easily. Kind of playing loosey-goosey because I'm busy talking. But I think, for example, this is an encounter that I find memorable, but that might just be because I fought this guy over and over again over here when I first played the game. So sometimes the encounters just become memorable for like personal reasons, but I think the game is good enough at designing its encounters that most encounters in the game have some level of being memorable to you. I think a big flaw of Dark Souls, but even then, I don't know if it's a flaw or not. I think it depends on how you approach video games. I think it is a flaw from my sensibilities, because I think the best part of a game is its minute-to-minute gameplay and systems, and I think Dark Souls has an interesting enough combat system where it's not really complex, but it has enough kind of like raw kind of engagement to it, and it's kind of visceral, that you kind of don't get tired of it, but you can kind of ignore the combat and just run away from encounters. It's really easy to kind of run away from everything. And I guess you could say like, oh, maybe that's kind of a good thing because it gives you the option. You can always run. And a lot of, like, you could even say, well, what I'm doing right now, I ran past a bunch of strong enemies just to get just to go where I'm going. And that's true. It's part of my sequence break that I'm doing. But the fact that I can do this, I think, is really interesting. I think it's the mark of a well-made game is when you can plan out routes, and if you think there's a path from point A to point B and the game lets you do it, usually, and it's like there's no invisible walls, and there's no like the only thing blocking you is your own skill and a knowledge of the game world. I think that's very good. I don't like when stuff is artificially gated. I think at best things should be gated behind items and behind tools, like in Metroid. Like, for example, the fact that you can't explore Meridia efficiently without the gravity suit because Meridia is filled with water, that makes sense. But the fact that you can reach Meridia even if you don't have the gravity suit is good. Like it's like it's not like the game's like, oh, you can't go to Meridia because you don't have the suit, or because like you haven't reached a certain like appropriate point in the game, so you're not allowed to go there. I think that's a strength of like Metroid games. I think Dark Souls draws a lot from some dungeon crawlers and from Metroid games. Here, what's nice about here is now I've kind of skipped an entire area with nothing of value, you could say, and now I'm in a pseudo hub that connects to many places. And what I like about this area is that it's a great shortcut to Firelink Shrine, and I think this is really great because now I'm gonna go through the game the normal way. But basically, I went through down and under and all the way up, and then I went back down, and I'm back to where we started. I'm back at Firelink Shrine, and this is one of those like haha moments where geometrically and map design wise, you know, this makes total sense. You can buy that the path you've traveled brings you back here, and that's one of the things I think that makes Dark Souls so timeless for a lot of people, is this sense of cohesion of the map. Like it just connects in such a way where you don't even need to have played the game a million times to remember the map, to have the map stick in your head, because the map is so intuitive, and the way it connects together, it creates these like anchor points in your mind. So even after one playthrough, or like not even a full playthrough, I feel like a lot of people end up remembering Dark Souls' map. They end up remembering how to navigate it. And I think a lot, if you ask people to draw the map of Dark Souls, they would be able to draw like a pretty good part of the map just from memory, because of the way it feels so like so intuitive. And I think that's probably the greatest strength. I think the reason why the backstab is so strong also is that it's a bit of like it's a bit janky, so you don't have to be perfectly aligned with their back to kind of pull it off. So you end up having a lot of room for it. So sometimes even if you kind of hope for a backstab, you'll probably get it, and then you're locked into like an immortal state where, you know, you can't take damage, and you basically most of the time will insta kill or almost insta kill an enemy. But I also understand the point of the backstab. It's kind of a nod to Kingsfield, where, you know, going behind an enemy was often the best way to fight them, because a lot of enemies attacked right in front of them. So you have that that incentive. Also, I think it adds to you know, in Demon Souls, the backstab animations were kind of very visceral, very like intense, and I think it adds to that kind of, you know, physicality and visceral aspect of the moment-to-moment combat. And I think that's also part of like the vibes, as I've been saying. Another thing I like about well, not another thing, I wouldn't say I like it. I think it could maybe be better executed, but I think it's executed well enough for what the Dark Souls combat needs. Okay, so yeah, so by doing this, I've triggered the dragon. So now later on, there's a part of the game where a dragon shows up, if I had gone through the map backwards like I did earlier, the dragon would never spawn because I never came here to trigger the dragon to spawn in the first place. So by doing this, I've made a later area harder than if I had progressed through the game backwards, because that area, I would have reached it from the back and the dragon would never show up. I'm kind of skipping a little bit of things, like you know, there's a lot of optional items you can pick up and stuff, but I think that's best experienced on your own, you know, as you explore, finding things that you want. I will go through the entire game, at least I hope so, but I'm not gonna go find every little optional item if I don't deem them to be important enough. So this weapon also has a critical modifier on it, I believe, because it's a piercing weapon. Okay, I roll a bit slower, but it's not a problem. I like piercing weapons. I like the range they provide. I like their moveset. I like that the S-Stock has a sweep, so I can kind of do multiple hits on enemies. Kind of like a... It's good for tackling multiple enemies, which is kind of a challenge in the game. So if you can find a weapon that's able to hit multiple enemies, it's useful. And if you can find a weapon that has a good amount of range, it's also useful. What's nice too about piercing weapons is you can block and attack from behind your shield, so that offers extra options in combat. And it also changes your kick into kind of like a little I don't know what they call it, like a feint. So you can kind of back off while attacking. But I've never found a use for the feint, whereas the kick I think is always useful because you can break guard. The enemy tried to drink an Estus flask, and I find that very interesting because they say that, like, you know, Estus flasks are for undead people to heal, so it makes sense that enemies would be able to do it too, because enemies are also undead. It's like you. And I keep forgetting, because I've been talking about options in combat, but I should show the defensive options too. This guy's cool.
Well now, you seem to have your wits about you, hmm? Then you are a welcome customer. I trade for souls. Everything's for sale.
So this is potentially the first vendor in the game if you don't talk to Petrus and join his covenant. But what's interesting about this is that your money is also your
What a waste of time.
He's mad because I didn't buy anything.
Fall off a cliff.
But your money is also your experience. So sometimes, you know, you might want to buy something, but you'll lose out on potentially leveling up. So it adds a I think it's not as well executed because usually stuff you can buy is not that useful except for weapon upgrades. But like it adds a kind of a strategic element to how you spend your souls, because like, do you want to spend your souls to upgrade your weapons? Do you want to spend your souls to buy stuff? Or do you want to spend your souls to level up? But in practice, like leveling up your weapon and leveling up your character tends to be a lot better, usually, especially leveling up your weapon. Anyway, I'm gonna kill this guy because I can't buy his items, but I think he doesn't have enough strength to swing his weapon because the way he's pretty slow about it. But it might just because he's an enemy NPC. Yeah, I wanted the residence key, and I want his katana, even though I'll probably never use it. So I killed him to get his items, which is kind of tragic. But that brings me to something that I actually like about this game, which is, and it's something that maybe people take for granted, which is, I'm gonna block. So when you block, you lose a little bit of stamina. And if your shield doesn't have a 100% block for physical, you take a little bit of damage. But blocks are reliable, you know, you can just hold the button and you won't take damage. I believe if you block at the right time, you take a little bit less stamina damage. I might be wrong about that though. Then your other option is the parry, but not all shields can parry. So but parry is like a high risk, high reward, because if you mess up your parry, you get hit. Whereas block is, it's like no risk, no reward, because you can't really do anything except not take damage. And then you have the so yeah, I guess shield is low risk, low reward. Parry is high risk, high reward, but in the end, parry is not that good because not everything can be parried, and you don't necessarily want to parry everything. And then rolling is like medium risk, medium reward, because you get to reposition, you get to avoid damage. Either you avoid damage because you're repositioning yourself away from an attack, or you avoid damage because there's invincibility frames. Like you can dodge into attacks. Not guy took damage, but you can roll into attacks and you won't take damage because of invincibility frames. And I find that as you play more and more and more, dodging becomes the best option. Like when you watch people play Dark Souls at like a high level, so to speak, what you'll see most is people dodging. And it's because you can just kind of abuse the fact that there's invincibility frames to really negate almost every attack and just stay right in the enemy's face and just be aggressive. I think it's nice because it's one playstyle that works. However, my problem with it is that I think invincibility frames are too strong, so you end up over relying on them instead of using the dodge for repositioning quickly. But I understand also that the point of the dodge is to have a risk reward aspect to it, where, you know, if you mess up your timing and you don't get to use the invincibility frames the way you want them to, you'll get hit, or you'll be right next to the enemy. So even if you didn't get hit, you'll be right next to the enemy, so you might get hit again. You know, I appreciate, because using invincibility frames has always been something that, you know, traditional action games do. It's always something where, you know, oh, I'm gonna do a grab attack because when I'm in the grab state, I don't take damage, or I'm going to do a finisher because if I do a finisher, I don't take any damage, or I'm gonna pick up an item because when I pick up an item, there's invincibility frames for the animation, so I won't take any damage. Like a lot of games, to like really maximize how much damage you take, and to maximize how much damage you can deal in a short period of time, and how like to stay in combat, you end up using a lot of invincibility frames, and I think that's nice. However, I think it should only be an option and not the be-all end-all of how to play. And I think in Dark Souls, at a certain level, you know, it does become the be-all end-all and not merely an option. I feel like there should be the way the combat works should incentivize to use blocking and dodging as two as two things that you would want to do, and not just have one solution for every problem, which dodging becomes as you play more and more. And I think parrying is a bit awkward. Like, it's useful, of course, but it's only useful against like melee enemies that are the same size as the player. You can parry large enemies, but because of the game's like development, large enemies will often not have an animation for you to parry, to do like a riposte, because it'll look awkward. So like here, you know, it doesn't look that awkward because it's the same size as me, but when it's a really big enemy, it might look awkward, or it might look unfeasible, so you end up not having you can parry them, but you can't riposte them. And against bosses can't be parried, so you kind of lose that. Well, some bosses can, but most bosses can't be parried, so you end up you end up being like, well, okay, so what's the point of parrying? Where like the most high octane combat, where you would want to really test all your skills and your abilities and like really make use of everything you know, would be bosses. But when you fight bosses, you can't parry like 90% of the bosses in the game. So since you can't parry 90% of the bosses in the game, it becomes about blocking, moving, and dodging. Because moving is also you could say moving is also a defensive option. Like I can just kind of move out of the way of his attacks, but now I'm getting sunlocked, so I can't. So dodging becomes my best option. But technically, you can just move out of the way of the attack. See, these guys are like the limit of how big an enemy can be, and you can still parry them. I'll show an example soon. I think this encounter is pretty memorable. It's like if you play the game in the quote-unquote right order, this is the first Dark Knight you meet, and he's facing away from you, and you know he's in like down this hallway. So you see him, and you kind of want to creep up on him, slowly, and you can try to backstab him because you know backstab is so efficient. And then he turns. But sometimes, like if you go too quick or you're wearing heavy armor and you make noise, he like turns around, and then you have to fight him, and it's kind of cramped, and he has a big attack, and he sweeps a lot, so it kind of becomes a little challenge to do so. But then you get a little reward, which is a ring that's not very good, but it's also probably the first ring you find in the game, so it feels more significant than it is, and I think that's. It feels more significant than it is, and the little moment itself feels kind of cinematic, you know, going down the stairs. Then you see the guy, and you're like, oh my god, that guy's so big, and he's wearing like this badass armor. What am I gonna do? So in a way, you know, through framing and through kind of atmosphere and level geometry, it creates an encounter that's kind of memorable. And the fact that it's also memorable just from the fact that it's the first time you meet a Dark Knight. So this is, if you play really quickly and you don't pay attention to stuff, you won't notice that there's a guy with a barrel up there. So once again, you know, I think it's nice that Dark Souls incentivizes like slow play and caution, but the thing is, if you have enough reaction speed, you can just kind of dodge through the barrel. I didn't dodge through in this case, but you can dodge through the barrel, which I think goes against the idea of making the game kind of more slow-paced and more you know, adventure caution and paying attention to your surroundings. Because if you can solve almost every problem by just dodging, it feels less fun. However, I guess you could say also, like, once again, it's a tool that you have at your disposal. So if you see the barrel in advance, you might think, okay, instead of kind of baiting the barrel and running away, I could just, because I know dodging has invincibility frames, I could just go up the stairs and roll through the barrel, which is, you know, it's obviously an option. But then it becomes like a risk. Like, do you think you could do that? Like, are you good enough to be able to do that? This is also probably the first time you meet a Crystal Lizard, and I think it's pretty interesting that they put it right next to a set of stairs, and that set of stairs has like a little cliff that you can fall, because what's probably going to happen is the Crystal Lizard is going to run away, it's going to fall down, and then you're going to follow it and then do a jumping attack on it and instantly kill it, which is very useful because jumping attacks do a lot of damage. And so it teaches you that, you know, Crystal Lizards are often hidden and that they'll try to run away, but then you can go do a jumping attack and kill it. But in this case, I missed. But it also shows that fighting in stairs is very awkward. So here, once again, if you have video game literacy, I guess you could say, you'll probably expect a boss, because like you can't go back. And last time you went through a fog wall, you had a boss, and the time before that where you had a fog wall, it did nothing. But in this case, you know, the fog wall that did nothing, it stayed open after you went through. So in this case, the fact that the fog wall doesn't open behind you means that you're probably gonna have to fight a boss or some sort of challenge. So it pays to be observant and be careful. So, you know, if you walk up slowly and try to bait where the monster is going to come from, you're not going to see anything. But if you go slowly enough, you'll get shot by these guys, and you'll know, oh, I have to go up there and fight these guys. And going up there, you also see kind of a teaching moment from the tutorial. You see, oh, well, if I do have to fight a boss, I can run up here and do a jumping attack, because jumping attacks are so strong, it might make the boss fight easier. And I think it's what a lot of people end up doing, is they end up doing a jumping attack on the boss. But I don't think it's necessary. I think the boss is slow enough and easy enough that you don't need to do a jumping attack to fight him. But if you're you know, you're not doing much damage and you're struggling, you might want to do jumping attacks against him, because it's a nice way to get like reliable damage. You can also make him fall through the map if you're good enough at like baiting attacks and positioning. But I'm not the best at that. Like I kind of struggle to make enemies fall off. I feel like I'm a little bit too slow, so I'll try to lighten myself up a little bit. I think a lot of the early, well, not a lot of the early encounters after the tutorial, I think one thing that makes them a little bit more difficult than they are is that they're often in cramped spaces, so you end up trying to move around and the camera's awkward, and you end up colliding with the boss a lot, and there's a lot of issues with like level geometry where, and like just like model size and model geometry, where you'll kind of fall into the, like you'll get hit even though you're behind and you didn't think you would get hit, or things like that. Pretty interesting. I remember this guy being weaker than he is, but it's because usually I fight him with upgraded weapons, and in this case my weapons aren't upgraded. It's cool that he can break the environment around you. Ouch. So we could try doing a jumping attack on him. I don't remember how efficient it is, but I'll probably take damage as I go up here and he tries to attack me. Oh, I got lucky. While I'm up here, I will say one thing that's cool is wow, I missed. One thing that's cool is you can heal with humanities, which is kind of like a last resort, because humanity is kind of a useful item. So you know, healing with humanity feels like you might be wasting it. And also the animation is really long, so you might die before you can do it. But it's a nice option. The only thing that I dislike is that humanity is kind of infinite, so you can kind of just heal forever if you have enough humanities. Yeah, this boss fight's stronger than it's harder than I remember. I believe this guy's weak to lightning, so the fact that they give you lightning resin right before is very useful for you. Look at that. See, the game gives you so many tools. I still died though. But the game gives you so many tools, which is something I really appreciate. It gives you the lightning, it gives you fire bombs, it gives you the ledge that you can jump off to kill him. Of course I died to him. I got overconfident. But you don't even have to fight this guy. This guy is entirely optional. Because like I said, you can just go through the level backwards. Which is what I'm going to do now. I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you why you would want to go through the level backwards. Like I said, one advantage of going through the level backwards is that it avoids the dragon encounter. So since it avoids the dragon encounter, you never spawn the dragon. So it makes this area where you can get nuked very easily into a really safe area, which is nice. And the other thing is it skips the bridge, so you don't have to fight the Taurus demon, and therefore you don't have to go through that kind of pointless challenge. Not that he's very hard, but you know, I still died to him, so. I like that Dark Souls has no pause. I think it's one of the things I like about it. It means that you're always in the moment, you know. You're always you can never pause and take a breather and think about what you're gonna do. You always have to you always have to pay attention and be aware of what you're doing, and once again, you know, think like an adventurer and not think like an adventurer and be cautious. So this is a guy that you can parry, but you can't riposte him because he's too big. So this is what I mean where I say, like, you know, the parry feels like a powerful option, but the more you get to know the game intimately, the less powerful the parry becomes, because it actually just becomes a better call to backstab. General rule is if you can backstab somebody, you can parry them. So in this case, I can't backstab this guy either. I can only parry him. I can parry him, but I can't riposte, is what I mean. But here I'm fighting two enemies, one that's stronger than the other. So the fact that I have a long range weapon is nice, and the fact that I can do sweeps is also nice. I like the enemies drink Estus when they're on low health, because that's what you would do. And they're undead too, so makes total sense. Ouch. You know, going through Dark Souls again, I understand why people find it difficult. There's a certain difficulty to it where it's a difficulty that you don't necessarily take for granted until you play the game, but you know, maybe it's because I've been playing so much like Devil May Cry and stuff recently, but the fact that you have to really commit to everything you do, it makes Dark Souls feel very like clunky in a way, but it's deliberate. You know, it's part of the. I'm gonna try to drink Estus too, I think, because you can. It makes you very aware of your character's body and your character's strengths and weaknesses. It makes you aware of like your positioning a lot more and everything. Like I feel like in Devil May Cry, positioning doesn't matter that much because you always kind of want to be in the thick of it, and you always want to be fighting the enemies. You know, using hit stun and knockdown and juggling to keep them at bay. More so than it to keep your distance and use positioning and everything. Whereas in here, you know, because you're very much underpowered compared to the enemies, unlike in Devil May Cry, you care a lot more about what you're doing. Every action counts a little bit more, and it's a different thing. You know, it's vibes. Like I said, it has nothing. I think it's not that one combat system is better over another. I think it's just different priorities for different kinds of games. Dark Souls is about situational awareness. It's about taking in the world. It's about you know, it's about thinking like an adventurer and being cautious. Devil May Cry is about arcade style combat, scoring, being stylish, feeling cool, everything. Like this, you just want to feel clever, you want to feel smart, you want to feel observant, you want to feel like, you know, you're getting lost in the world and paying attention to what you're doing. I think it's that feeling of being an adventurer and being cautious. It's at its best when you play the game the first time, because you don't know what's across the corner. You don't know what's ahead of you. Like you don't know when the next healing. You don't know where the next bonfire is. So you play a lot more cautiously. You know, there's a risk reward thing where do I press onwards even though I'm low on resources in hopes that I can find a new bonfire, or do I double back, heal at the bonfire, use the knowledge I've acquired to progress more easily, and have to go through all these enemies that I already killed again because they'll respawn. I think it's a nice trade-off, but at the same time, and this brings me kind of to the healing system. Usually, you know, 5 Estus is exactly what you need to progress further. 5 Estus is how do I put this? Like 5 Estus is the game is designed around you having 5 Estus at all times. So it's very easy to be able to progress with 5 Estus. Oh god, it locked onto the wrong guy. I might die. I'm okay. Actually, a bigger hindrance than I remember. Not having not being able to kick because I have to do a little feint. But yeah, the healing system. So you have 5 Estus at all times because, well, not at all times, but like the game is balanced around you having 5 Estus. So basically, it's like I believe when they designed the game, it's like, okay, how far can you get on 5 Estus if you play pretty well, and then they place a bonfire there. And if you want to make, and like there's a built-in difficulty meter, you could say, where it's all about if you want to make the game easier, you sacrifice a little bit of humanity to get more Estus to be able to do in between bonfires with more Estus each time. And I think that while that's a nice way to kind of balance difficulty a little bit, it also means that like you'll never be at 0. You like the worst you'll ever have is 5 Estus. Because like let's say, you know, you spend all your resources getting from point A to point B. If you spend all your resources going from point A to point B, and you this is pretty dangerous. The rats can poison you, and early on in the game you don't have any way to protect yourself from poison. You don't have any way to heal poison. I feel like my camera stick is acting a little weird right now. But once again, the advantage of having sweeping attacks means I can take care of multiple enemies at once. Okay, so you're never gonna be at 0. You'll never be in a worse situation than you were before, I guess you could say, because you can always just go back and then get 5 Estus. In most dungeon crawlers and in Demon Souls, which I would say is even more of a dungeon crawler than this game, because you have to spend a resource to heal, you can end up in a situation where you have no healing and you just have to persevere. So if you struggle, you actually end up in a worse situation than you started off in, which I think is very great. It's the kind of game design that I like. So as you can see, there's a dragon that just burnt everything up to a crisp up here. And, you know, I made it spawn. So now I'm in a kind of situation where, you know, if I go here, he spits fire and I can't really... I can't really progress into that hole over there. Because so, you know, had I gone through the level backwards and never spawned the dragon, then this would not be the case. We're still gonna try though. But yeah, so in Dark Souls you always have that safety net of, you know, for sure you'll always have 5 Estus, so you're always kind of like in a... It means that you have to spend less time grinding for healing items and worrying about maintaining your resources. So you can spend more time just getting lost in the world and focusing on the minute-to-minute gameplay instead of thinking about like resource management and everything. So the healing system in Dark Souls is beneficial to its gameplay structure of the interconnected world, but it's, I think, makes you lose some level of tension that I like in these kinds of games, where I like when this is so stupid. The fire animation looks like it's off, and then you still get hit. All right, spit fire, you dumb lizard. But yeah, I think the grass healing in Demon Souls works well for Demon Souls, and I think the SS healing works well for Dark Souls. Wow. I guess I was closer to the fire, so I took more damage. Yeah, it's one of those things, like, I think people say, oh, the healing system in Dark Souls is objectively better because it's more fair and you'll always have healing, and it means that you can make 5 mistakes before you have to to go back. And it lets you like get lost in the game, and but I think it you know, Demon Souls was not about getting lost in the game. Demon Souls was about thinking like an adventurer and being immersed in the kind of like the dungeon crawling mindset and everything. And I think that if Demon Souls had SS healing, it would actually made the game much too easy, because the levels themselves were, you could say they were discrete. Like, it was, you know, you had Boletaria 1-1, you had Boletaria, you had Boletaria 1, Boletaria 2, Boletaria 3, and so on. And, you know, each level had a specific length, and if you had 5 Estus, or, you know, like a fixed set of healing items for that level, it would make it a lot more easy to go through that level. Whereas having limited resources means that if you struggle on one level, you might struggle again on a different level, and you can't take what you have for granted. It's more of a punishing mindset, but it's also, you know, in Demon Souls, every area has a resource that area like focuses on. So Boletaria has grass. So if ever, because of the non-linear nature of the game, if ever, let's say you struggle really hard on Stonefang Mine, and you end up losing all your grass, you can go to Boletaria and try to do a Boletaria level and build up a little bit of grass. Whereas, I'm gonna die, aren't I? Whereas, if you struggle in Dark Souls, you know, and the fact that the game is so big and there's no like concrete levels, because everything is just kind of connected, if you struggle a lot on one level, you can't like travel across half the map just to go get healing items in the place that has more healing items. Like you could, but you kind of lose that adventure feel. You would lose that moment-to-moment gameplay. You would lose that like immersion because you'd be too focused on like, okay, well now I need healing items. Let me backtrack all the way back to, I don't know, like let me backtrack all the way to the Undead Burg so that I can get healing items. And it kind of stops the progression dead in your tracks. Whereas in Demon Souls, if you do Boletaria 1-1, then you do Stonefang, so 2-1 I think, and then you struggle on 2-1, you can just go to Boletaria 1-2, because Boletaria, no matter what level in Boletaria you're in, you could just do another Boletaria level, still progress, build up some grass by doing a Boletaria level, and then go back to Stonefang. Or let's say, you know, you want to upgrade your weapon, you could just do a Stonefang level and get a bunch of ore to upgrade your weapon. And then maybe that means you're strong enough to take on other levels. Whereas in Dark Souls, you know, if you want to upgrade your weapon, then it's like, well, oh, I gotta upgrade my weapon. I have to let me go to the place where you know, they drop a lot of Titanite, and then it would kind of just be like a struggle. So having just a bunch of enemies in the game randomly drop Titanite and having Titanite kind of drop everywhere means that you'll always be able to upgrade your weapon to some degree. Now, because this is an adventure, the highest tier of upgraded weapons and the more specific weapon upgrade materials, those will be hidden in specific places that usually will be reflective. Oh my god. Oh my god. Getting stunlocked by rats. Oh my god. Wow. See, never take any moment for granted in Dark Souls. But yeah, like, because this is an adventure and they still want you to explore and think like an adventurer, you still have to find certain niche items in certain niche areas, and usually it's logical. Let's say you have a fire weapon, you know, and you want to upgrade your fire weapon to the highest tier of fire weapons. Where would I find fire related upgrade materials? Well, in a fire area, of course. So at that point, you know, because you've kind of taken that step into becoming a more niche build that uses fire weapons, you'll go to the fire area to get your fire materials. And usually that kind of nicheification of your build happens more in the late game, which means that at that point in the game you have the Lord Vessel, so you can warp. And since you can warp at that point in the game, you can go to any area you want anytime, which I think is good to some degree, because the distance between each individual level gets so large because you're so late in the game and the game has opened up so much that backtracking becomes more tedious than it becomes fun. And also, like, you can't have that like masterful, perfectly designed map stretch out for the entire game. Like, of course you could in a perfect world with like enough resources and enough time, but in the reality we live in, you know, games are made with a limited budget, limited manpower, limited resources, limited time. So the Dark Souls map, I think, is at its best early on when you're still in like the Undead Burg, Sense Fortress, you know, Depths, Blighttown, New Londo kind of region, where everything is close and really dense, really tight. Like everything is connected, but it's connected in like a really tight way. Whereas later in the game, like, you get so far away, even then it's not even connected anymore. Like, to get to Anor Londo, you need to go through a cutscene. So at that point, you know, the world isn't even interconnected the same way. It's not even interconnected in a you know, a nice, clear, crisp way anymore. So at that point, like, the advantages of Dark Souls' interconnected level design start to fail. And oh, coincidentally, that's also at the time at which they introduce warping, because the map gets so big and the interconnectedness becomes lesser, that you have to rely on the warp at that point. So the fact that in a way they introduce nichifying your build late game, and that's when you start to require more niche ingredients to upgrade your weapons and stuff. Oh god. I got too greedy, I wanted to pick up the item. Well, it just lets me speak more. But yeah, because you start to nichify your build later, and the niche materials are later in the game, and the niche materials are how do you say, the niche materials require you to go on like an adventure to get them, like if you want to get the red titanite slab, you have to go through the fire area, and you have to fight like through a gauntlet of enemies and fight a very specific enemy to get the red titanite slab. So that's like a proper adventure, but the reward is that you get the ultimate tier of your fire weapon. So it's worth it. It feels like an adventure. Now, how would you know that it's there? That's a different question, you know. But you can use your adventurer's intuition to be like, well, obviously, a fire material would be in the fire area. So if I want the strongest fire weapon, I need to find the strongest fire material. And to find the strongest material, I would have to go in the fire area. Makes total sense. And then you go on an adventure to find that. So at that point, the game is open enough because of the warping, and because every single area is not reachable from that point onwards. You're able to go on these adventures to find these niche materials. And if you ever get stuck, or you ever, you know, you ever can't find the material you're looking for, you can just warp and continue doing what you were doing before. In a way, I think that's very lenient. And I don't know how I feel about that. I don't like when games are too lenient towards the player. I like when there's some level of accounting for your actions and having to kind of pay the price. Like, oh my god, if you take a risk, you kind of have to live with that risk. And with warping, like you'll never get lost the same way. You'll never have to dedicate yourself to one place in the map to prolong, which I think is a bit sad, because you kind of lose that adventure mindset a little bit. And speaking of kind of player stuff being made for the player for the player's sake, one thing that I think people don't really take for granted, and I wanted to say this earlier and I forgot because I got distracted, was oh my god, one thing I take so much damage, it's crazy. One thing that I'm not used to playing Dark Souls in the right direction. I usually go, you know, through Undead Burg, and I upgrade my weapon and I get really strong, and then I start wrecking the game. But one thing I think people take for granted, or maybe don't realize how important it is to the game, is the game autosaves at every single moment. Everything you do has like a permanent consequence, even if it's just dying and losing your souls. That is permanent because you can't reload a save. The game saves every second. So if I were to quit the game right now, I would have 261 souls with my current equipment and my current level of health. And let's say, for the sake of whatever, I end up getting lost. And this is before you can warp. Let's say I end up getting lost. Like, I decide to go in the catacombs because even though the skeletons are too strong for me, I persevere, I run through, and then I go fight the skeletons, right? In the catacombs. I end up in the catacombs, right? And the catacombs is an area that a low-level player could beat if they know the structure of the level, and they kind of run past a lot of the enemies that are too strong for them. Oh my god, the boar's here. I think the catacombs could be beat by a low-level player, but chances are the catacombs are too strong for a low-level player, especially if you're unexperienced with the game. But the thing is, because you've gone into the catacombs and you've kind of disregarded all risks, now you're oh my god, the boar. Now you're stuck in the catacombs, and you either have to go backwards through the catacombs and try to survive, which is tough because you're in the catacombs, or you try to persevere through and get through the catacombs. But then the problem is, if you go through the catacombs, you're still if you go through the catacombs, you're still deeper into the catacombs than before. So doubling down and going through will put you further into the catacombs. It will put you further into danger. So backtracking is going to be even harder, which I think is really cool, because you can't reload a save and go like, oh, I'm going to go to where I was before I got to the catacombs. Before I did that mistake. You have to live with your mistakes. You have to go through the level that you put yourself through. And let's say you know, you're I don't know, this is something that I wanted to talk about later, but I may as well talk about now and bring it back when we get back to it. Let's say you go through the depths and you get cursed. And when you get cursed, you lose half your health until you uncurse yourself. And uncursing yourself is not the most easy task. Uncursing yourself means either talking to an NPC to uncurse yourself or finding one of the few items that will let you uncurse yourself. So you might have to spend a pretty big chunk of the game cursed. And you can't reload a save and be like, well, I'm gonna reload to when I wasn't cursed because I hate being cursed because it means I only have half my health. You kind of have to live with the consequences of getting cursed. And that's because the game always saves at every moment. So every action feels permanent. And I think that's very good. I think it's something that people don't really notice because it's so ingrained into the game that everything that happens to you is permanent. But it even goes beyond that. It even goes to your actions in the game. Like, the game has quests, and the quests are very fluid. Like, you don't have a quest log, you don't have NPCs that tell you like specifically like, oh, do this and this and this, and you'll get your you know, I'll give you a reward, or like, oh, I'm can you do this for me? Like, a lot of the time the NPCs are oh god, the NPCs are I need to use my long range, my advantage. Use a bottleneck to your advantage in long range. But yeah, the NPCs are very they come and go. They you know, they're living their own lives while you live your own life. And because the quests are so fluid, sometimes you might make decisions during quests that you don't even know is a decision, or that you don't even know is a quest. So sometimes you might do something that will, you know, change the course of an NPC's quest. So you might do something that's going to anger an NPC. You might do something that's going to, you know, affect something down the line. And because Dark Souls has a lot of, at least when it comes to quests, there's a lot of mutually exclusive things. Doing one thing might mean you can't do something else. And you know, if you anger an NPC, or I'm gonna die probably. Yeah. If you anger an NPC or you fail their quest, that's it. You can't go back. You can't save you can't load a save. So it makes your interactions, everything in the game, that much more like concrete. That much more like it feels like everything you do matters. And I think that's something that people don't talk about a lot in this game, but I think it's something that is integral to the experience. And whether or not you're aware of that, you still like feel the consequences of that. You still experience the fact that you still experience the fact that your actions are permanent and that there are consequences to what you do. Now, like I said, I think the Lord Vessel and getting to warp means that those kind of, oh shit, I just kind of screwed myself over moments where you're stuck in an area that is too strong for you, or you're stuck in an area that you don't know how to progress through, and you have to persevere and be smart. You don't get those moments as much later on because you can just warp, like, oh no, I got stuck, let me just go to a bonfire and teleport to somewhere else, and I'll try again in a different way. Like, it loses it when a game that is very defined by exploration and defined by vertical, horizontal progress. Like in Dark Souls, if you're ascending or descending, usually you're kind of doing progress in some way. When you lose that, so tying progress in a game that's based on exploration, tying progress to movement is important. So the fact that you kind of lose that commitment to movement the more you play the game, because you end up getting the ability to warp, I think hurts the game, but also semi-benefits the game, because at that point it's a bit of a mess because the game gets too big for its own good. But had the level design been tighter, or had all the kinks been ironed out, it could have probably worked. I don't know, it's, you know, speculation, obviously. I'm not a professional game designer, I'm only an amateur game designer. I'm working on my own game, but my own game will not have a super deep interconnected world, blah blah, because my game is going to be a 2D RPG, not a 3D game. But I think even what have I done? I think even platformers can benefit from this. You know, platformer maps, I think platformer maps, if there's no commitment to movement and the way you move ends up being because like platformers, it's all about movement, right? It's all about like progression through either ascension or through like some form of movement. Usually I say ascension because platformers are all about jumping and navigating a 3D space. So as soon as navigating a 3D space, which is like the crux of the game, stops being something that's actually significant and or important that impacts the way you experience the game. Like let's say, you know, you go from a game where every pit is a bottomless pit, so every jump is very important, to playing a game where to then like the further you get into the game, the fewer bottomless pits there are. So when you mess up a jump, you can just kind of reset you can kind of just reset. I feel that like instead of increasing the complexity and the depth and furthering the kind of platforming experience, you're actually detracting from it. But at the same time, you could say, well, it's actually greater punishment, because if you die in a bottomless pit, you just restart and you'll die again. Whereas if you fall down and it's not a bottomless pit, you might have to do more platforming to get back to where you started than if you had simply died and it put you back on like a earlier platform. I don't know. There's like I said, there's no such thing as, well, I never said that, but it's kind of what I'm trying to get with is there's no such thing as universally good design. The design always depends on context. It always depends on what you're trying to do with your game and what you're trying to make the players feel and experience. I think in Dark Souls, because it's so much about getting lost in the world and exploring and feeling like an adventure, when you kind of lose the permanence of your actions to some degree, because at least your positioning based progress becomes impermanent due to warping, even though everything else stays permanent, like you know, everything else stays permanent, like whether you anger NPCs or not, your quest progress, your souls, if you lost souls or not, and things like that. I think because it's a game about exploration, exploration is the number one thing that should feel like it matters, and later in the game it doesn't matter as much. And I think that's why people always say, oh, the second half of Dark Souls, you know, it's not as good. It's not just because the levels stop being as interconnected. I think it's also because stuff feels less significant, it feels less important, it feels less like it matters. Partially, and I don't know if the warping, I don't know if they removed the warping because the levels stopped being interconnected as much, or it didn't matter, or if they gave you warping as a concession because they knew that the level design wasn't as tight anymore because they didn't have time to iron it out. It's something that I've always wondered about. Like, did the warping cause the rest, or did the rest cause the warping? Either way, I think the last third of Dark Souls is not the best it could have been. And what makes me the most sad about that is that I think its sequels never kind of built upon that. All the Dark Souls sequels kind of handle their level progression and their level structure differently, instead of kind of evolving the structure of Dark Souls. And I'm not talking about Bloodborne or Elden Ring or Sekiro. I'm really talking about Dark Souls 1, 2, 3, because that's what this series is. You know, you can't expect Dark Souls, you can't expect like Bloodborne to necessarily be an evolution of Dark Souls design, because while it's built on similar foundations, they are fundamentally two different games. And I think that, so you have to, if you want to look at Dark Souls, you have to look at Dark Souls and its sequels, not Dark Souls and its, you could say, spin-offs or its brothers. Like in Dark Souls 2, they make the game very, I guess you could say, open-ended, where you can go to many places. However, those levels are all kind of separate and very linear. So while the game is more open-ended from a like how do I say this? It's more open-ended from a like number of areas you can visit at any moment standpoint. Each area does not bleed into another area quite as masterfully and interestingly. And in Dark Souls 3, while there is some interconnectedness to the areas, but inside themselves, like each area is, I would say like on average, most areas in Dark Souls 3 are better designed than areas in Dark Souls 1 as individual levels, but they're not integrated together well. Every area feels very separate. They don't feel like they're part of a bigger world. They just feel like different levels, that each level is coherent and each level is well designed, but each level does not bleed into another level as much. So it's probably easier to make each level individually better designed, because you can kind of just focus on the structure and level design of that one specific level and not have to think about how it fits with the other levels as much. You know, Dark Souls 1 is like spaghetti. Everything kind of like, how do you say this? Dark Souls 1 is like spaghetti because it's like a bowl of spaghetti. Everything kind of connects, everything's kind of layered, everything's very vertical, and it's kind of a mess in some ways, but at least everything kind of connects. Dark Souls 2 is like a snowflake where you can go to many places, but each place is kind of linear and might have side paths, but they're all linear. Like it doesn't kind of twist and turn into itself. It doesn't like have a satisfying logicalness to its design. Like I wouldn't be able to tell you exactly. I couldn't draw a map of Dark Souls 2 after my first playthrough of Dark Souls 2. The game feels very nebulous in my head. Like areas don't connect logically, and while each area I could probably draw a map of, I wouldn't be able to. And even then, I'm not sure I could, but I couldn't draw a map of the entire game. Whereas Dark Souls 1 I could, and it's not just because I have more hours in Dark Souls 1. I have similar hours in Dark Souls 1 and 2. It's just that I think because in 1, not only are landmarks more obvious, but the game also feels more logical. So everything kind of has a place in your brain and connects in a way that makes sense. It feels more continuous. Dark Souls 2 is more discrete, but it makes it so you kind of lose sharpness. In a way, you could say, like it doesn't fit in your head as tightly or as the same way. And Dark Souls 3 is not like a snowflake; it's more like a tree, where the game itself is linear and it's a tree with lots of gnarly branches. So the branches might intertwine together, and but the progression of the game itself is pretty linear and will branch out sometimes. And oh god. And the branches will, the branches might intertwine. The branches themselves have a lot going on. There's lots of leaves and lots of little twisty paths and stuff, but the structure is still like, you go from the base of the tree to the points, and then you have to backtrack a little bit. And also maybe as a concession to the fact that the levels are a bit not as well designed, you could say. Or at least the world itself is not as interconnected. Dark Souls 2 and Dark Souls 3, you can warp from the very start. There's a lot less commitment to exploration and to getting lost. And I wonder why that is. I wonder if it's because they don't want to do what Dark Souls 1 did and they kind of moved away from it, or if it's because they don't think they can fully realize that kind of level design, so they may as well not try. You know, it's one of those things where you can only really speculate about why the level design for each game is the way it is, because you would think like, oh, they're gonna build upon the foundations of Dark Souls 1. And they did in terms of mechanics, but in terms of the way you interact with the world, they actually just went in like a completely different direction for 2 and 3, where it's more about the non-linearity of the sequence in which you can do the levels, and not the non-linearity in the way you explore itself. And I thought with Elden Ring that's what they would do. Like they would make a big open world, and they would use the fact that it's an open world to connect areas through, I guess you could say, like expanses of land. Like, oh, because this area is connected to this area through this expanse of land. Like kind of like, I was expecting like The Legend of Zelda, where you have like Hyrule Field that kind of connects stuff. And Hyrule Field will branch out into right, Hyrule Field has like a bunch of landmarks and stuff, and it kind of connects, and certain areas connect to other areas. Like I think Lake Hylia connects to Gerudo Valley, for example, in Ocarina of Time, and things like that. But Elden Ring too, like everything just feels like its own discrete. In Elden Ring, everything feels discrete, and it's just that the open world is just kind of there, and it's a bunch of different. It's a bunch of open worlds that are connected together. It's not one big open world where everything is interconnected. It's like each open world is its own thing. You explore it on its own. It doesn't really connect in interesting ways to other open worlds. I really need to pee, so I'm gonna. Turns out, talking about a game while playing it makes it more difficult because you're more focused on creating interesting and coherent thoughts than you are about playing the game and focusing on what's going on. But I think it's fine. I think the fact that I'm dying a lot just means I have more time to talk, which for me is good because I like talking, but maybe for you it's bad because you're like, I just want to see this guy progress and I hate this. But you know, this is not really about me playing the game. It's more about me talking about the game while I play. It's more about what I have to say as I play. So you know, it's not a, I wouldn't say it's a playthrough. It's more of like the way my thoughts kind of bubble in my head as I play this game, and what I think is interesting to say. You know, it's kind of you know, tentatively I wanted to call this beef stews. This is probably what I'll call it because it's what's stewing in my mind as I play. Of course, I can form better, more coherent thoughts by writing them down and making like post commentary, but I like the kind of unscripted, unedited, more like you're just chilling with me as I play this game vibe. I hope I still have interesting things to say, but you know, I was thinking what I might do is do beef stews where I play and I just ramble as I play, but then I'll also do after I finish a game in beef stews, or I decide to stop playing a game in beef stews, I'll make a scripted video where I kind of sum up my thoughts and use the gameplay from beef stews to make that video while I do post commentary. But I like commentary during my my play. I think it's more dynamic in a way, and sometimes I just have random thoughts that pop in my head that maybe I wouldn't get from doing post commentary because it's so more scripted. For example, you know, I just noticed, I don't know exactly when it happened, but I have a 1 in my counter, so that's how much humanity I've acquired just by killing people. You can get humanity by eating the humanity items. These ones, humanity. Yeah, you can get humanity items like that, but and that'll give you humanity. And I think humanity is a awkward mechanic, but I think it's an interesting mechanic. It's the kind of thing where it's the kind of thing where it's interesting because it lets you opt in or out of multiplayer, and there's a risk involved when you have it, because if you're human, that means you open yourself up to invasions, so it's a risk. But when you're human, you can kindle bonfires, which give you more Estus, and you can summon other players, which will help you fight bosses. So it's kind of like a risk reward thing. And I think humanity as a way to modulate difficulty, but still involving a risk in it, is interesting. I don't know how else I would implement such a system because it's so like unique and experimental. I like that you opt in or out, and I like that while there's a lot of benefits to opting in, there's always that risk of being invaded. But now that I think the servers are down because there were a bunch of problems with people being able to execute code through the online. Because if you walk around, if you walk around, there's no player messages. There's only messages left by the developers. So I'm pretty sure, and also because I'm playing Dark Souls Prepare to Die edition. I'm not playing Dark Souls Remastered, so probably as well. You know, maybe the servers for Remastered are still on, but not for Prepare to Die edition. So now, like, now that you play the game in now that I'm playing the game after it died, there's no risk to being human. Like, you're not gonna get invaded, except by NPC ghosts, and you can still summon NPC ghosts to help you, and you can still kindle bonfires. So now it's like almost exclusively an easy mode to be human. I like that humanity is a resource that you can lose. I don't know how I feel about humanity insofar as, like, if I compare it to what they did before and after. Like, in Demon Souls, you had the Stone of Ephemeral Eyes, which made you get out of soul form and be in human form, and that meant that you could you had your full health, because if you died in Demon Souls, you would be in soul form, and when you're in soul form, you have less health. Because in a parry stance, so if I attack him, he'll parry me in the bust. But yeah, so in Demon Souls, there was always an incentive to oh look, I got another humanity. In Demon Souls, there was always an incentive to not be in soul form, because you just have more health if you were in human form. Oh, but when you're in human form, you're at risk of invasions, and also when you're in human form, you're also at risk of making your world go towards a dark tendency. And tendency is a crazy mechanic, because it's like, if you succeed a lot, the game becomes more easy and rewards you more, and if you die a lot, the game becomes harder and punishes you more. So I thought it was really cool, but it was clearly a very weird and experimental mechanic that I think a lot of people weren't behind. And I also think that it was kind of awkwardly executed. And Dark Souls, instead of bringing back world tendency in some way, they just kind of I'm gonna die. Yeah, it's a multi-hit. Dark Souls doesn't bring back world tendency, and it doesn't bring back, but it does bring back the alive form. It's a dead form. The difference is that there's no downside to being in dead form. Wasn't in Demon Souls, there's a big downside to being in dead form. So I think they made humanity too good in a way because of the online stuff, where you could actually, I think they made humanity too underwhelming. Because, like, if you're scared of being invaded and you're pretty good at the game, you don't have to become human at all. You can just play through the entire game in hollow form, and you'll never really miss out on anything, because you'll never be on low health. But what I like is that to become human, you have to use it. You have to use it as at a bonfire. So it means that you at least have to walk from the bonfire all the way to the boss, which means you can't just become human at the boss to get the benefits, and then you actually have to walk to the boss. Whereas in Demon Souls, you could take the Stone of Ephemeral Eyes right and become human at any time, so you would never be at risk, because you could just play through the level in soul form, and then as soon as you get to the boss, use the Stone of Ephemeral Eyes, and then not be at risk of being invaded, not being at risk of potentially dying to enemies and making the world tendency go dark. Of course, you could still die to the boss and make the world tendency go darker, but you know that's like the only risk you had at that point. And then in Dark Souls 2, they do gradual hollowing, where when you die, you lose a little bit of health, and over time you lose enough health that it's like being in soul form from Demon Souls, where you lose half your health, but it's gradual. So the game becomes harder the more you die, and you have human effigies that you can take to get back into human form, and then it regenerates all your health to its full maximum. So I think that's a nice approach. I actually like that, because it's like you get the gradual difficulty build up of like the more you die, the more the game struggles. But you kind of lose the risk of being in human form, because you can just use the human effigy anytime, and it makes you human again.
Thank you. Yes, sincerely. I am Knight Lautrec.
Like this guy.
I truly appreciate this, and I guarantee a reward. Only later. Yes, very sorry. Your reward will have to wait. I've just been freed. Allow me some time.
But yeah, like
I am free.
what a shady guy. But yeah, so now you can once again, you know, you don't have to use your human effigy at the bonfire, which means you don't have to means you can become human anytime. So you can just do the entire level, then when you're at the boss, use your human effigy, so there's no risk. There's no risk to get invaded, there's no risk to like dying before you get to the boss and not being at full health when you get to the boss. It's because also it fully heals you to use a human effigy, if I remember correctly. So there's that. I actually like the hollowing process in Dark Souls 2 more than I like it in Dark Souls 1, because it also feels like a hollowing process, because they explain that, you know, hollowing is that you gradually lose yourself as you die over and over again and lose your mind. So I do like that. And I also like that I believe in Dark Souls 2 they have it, but in Demon Souls they have it. They have the Cling Ring, where the Cling Ring makes it so you don't, instead of having half your health when you're in soul form, you have 3/4 of your health. So it minimizes the risk of being in soul form, but it takes a precious ring slot. But balance, so it's kind of a trade-off. You sacrifice a ring for the ability to to feel safer. And I believe Dark Souls 2 does that as well. And then in Dark Souls 3, they do the embering, where either you're embered or you're not. And multiplayer is locked behind being embered, just like in Dark Souls 1, it's locked behind being human, and in Dark Souls 2, it's locked behind being human, and in Demon Souls, it's locked being human. But when you're embered, you have more health. So it's actually a bonus. But when you're not embered, you don't have less health. You just have your normal amount of health. So it gives you a big incentive to be embered, because it makes you way stronger. But you also get, but it also means you opt into multiplayer. But the way they change the way multiplayer works means that it also means that you might be invaded, but it's very unlikely. Usually in Dark Souls 3, you'll get invaded more if you're playing with other people. If you play solo, you're much less likely to be invaded, which I think is a bit sad, in my opinion, because I think there should be a risk to the reward you get from being in embered form or human form or whatever. So I use my lightning, but now I'm just like kind of defending myself, so I'm not even able to hit it. So I might lose my lightning before. Oh, never mind. I'll definitely be able to kill him. No! I missed my attack by just a little bit, and it cost me the fight. See, this is one thing I like. You know, the game doesn't really have what I guess you could call move assist, where it kind of pushes you towards the enemy when you attack. The fact that the game doesn't have move assist means that if you attack, you attack. You know, like you're not going to be nudged. If you miss, you miss. It's not going to guarantee an attack like in the new God of War, or like in Batman Arkham games, or even a little bit like in Sekiro, or in a lot of modern action games. That's why, like, some people might find that it's clunky, but I think it just means that there's more commitment and there's more thought to be put into positioning and whatnot. So yeah, I don't know. I think hollowing and human form, it's something that's kind of awkwardly implemented. I understand the point of it. I understand why they did it the way they did, but I can't help but feel like there's a better way to create like optional difficulty while also adding benefits to, but also adding drawbacks to being dead that make you want to opt into those risks. I think in Dark Souls 1, the fact that your health doesn't change makes it a bit makes it feel samey, where you it makes it feel samey in the sense that whether you're human or not, the only thing that changes is if you can summon people. So, and they add the kindling mechanic, but kindling, it just gives you more heals. It doesn't change the state. It doesn't really change how you played that much. It doesn't change your state as much. It just means you can make more mistakes. And that's how it is in that's how it is in the other games too. But in the other games, it doesn't change how much healing you have. It just changes how much health you have. So, is it better to change a statistic, which is your health, or is it better to change a resource? I don't know. I will say that in Demon Souls, it was more useful to be in human form because healing items are limited. So having more health to begin with, which means that you could take more hits, meant that even if you were running out of materials to heal, at least you could take more hits. In whereas in these games, you know, because healing is infinite, theoretically, like having less health is not as much of a risk because you'll still have guaranteed healing. You'll still have like, oh, I can make 5 mistakes. Whereas in Demon Souls, you know, you can make mistakes obviously, but you can't heal yourself as reliably because healing items are limited. So I think it's interesting where in Demon Souls, you know, if you're low on health, it's like I can only do 2 mistakes because I have no healing items. So using a Stone of Ephemeral Eyes to have more health, it's like now I can do 5 mistakes, but I still can't heal myself. So it is, I think, a meaningful trade-off. Whereas in the other games, it doesn't feel as meaningful of a trade-off because of the Oh, I killed him. Nice. One thing that I wanted to talk about in this fight is that you can... I don't know if it's inspired by Monster Hunter, but to me it feels like it. And the combat does sometimes remind me of Monster Hunter, where, you know, it's very animation based and it's very like there's lots of commitment to everything you do, and it's very like kind of slow, and some people might say it's clunky, but it's because it's all about the vibes and all about like being aware of what you're doing and being mindful of your attacks. But you can cut enemy tails in this game, and when you cut enemy tails, you get rewards, which is kind of like in Monster Hunter. When you cut a tail, you get a reward. You get a carving from that tail, and the tail carving has different potential materials you can get from it than just carving the monster itself. And the first time I played this game, I always felt like, oh, this plays a little bit like Monster Hunter. And I don't know if cutting a tail is a nod to Monster Hunter or not. Because in the later games, you don't really get anything from cutting tails, nor do I even know if you can cut tails. I don't remember. So it'd be weird that like you can only do it in one game and then not in the other games if Monster Hunter is a big inspiration for them. I don't know, that's a mystery. That's just something I wanted to point out. So we've rung one Bell of Awakening, this one, but if we talked to NPCs earlier, we would have learned that there's actually 2 Bells of Awakening. One up high in the mountains and one down in the underground. And the prophecy was kind of vague about that. So now we have to find a way to go down. But we already found the key required. I don't really want to talk about the story too much, but I do want to talk about how the story is delivered. And I think it's interesting that, you know, the story, you experience it as much as you want to.
Greetings. I am Oswald of Karim, the Park. Thou appearest to lack faith. Yet magnanimous are the gods. Cometh thou to confess, or to accuse? For indeed all sins might for sin.
You know, I think that the fact that you get in as much as you put in as far as like the story goes. So if you want to read out of the descriptions, if you want to talk to NPCs, if you want to pay attention to what's going on, then you can. And if you don't want to, the game drip feeds you just enough with items and with the structure of the game itself that you're kind of able to know where you're going. For example, you know, you found a key earlier near the courtyard, and it's the basement key. Opens door leading to lower Undead Berg. Opens a narrow passage leading below to the far face of the Great Bridge in the Undead Berg. So it even tells you where you're allowed to use it. And then it warns you about the Undead Berg. It's a treacherous place. You gotta watch your step when you're there. And so now it's like, well, okay, I'll try to progress. I'll try to go in many different directions. And if you don't know where to go, you can at least count on the fact that you have the key to the lower Undead Berg. And it tells you where to go. You can kind of follow that lead. But of course now, you know, now that I'm here, there's so many leads I can take. I can go to the catacombs like I talked earlier. Maybe I'm strong enough now. I could go to New Londo and try to go through the ghosts. There's a forest down there. Maybe I could go through the forest. And or maybe I should go to Lower Undead Berg. Like there's enough pathways that you can kind of piece where you want to go and how you want to proceed yourself, which I like quite a bit. And I think it's beneficial to talk to NPCs and to kind of soak in the world because you are an adventurer after all, but really you don't need to if it's not the kind of thing that you like to do when you play games. And that's something I can respect from this game. I think you know, FromSoft are very you could say laissez-faire about their FromSoft are very laissez-faire about their stories and their games. Even in you know, Shadow Tower and in Kingsfield, you get in as much as you put in, and otherwise it's kind of very free form. You can just play the game and experience the combat and experience the exploration. And I'm gonna die again. And just kind of have your experience the game the way you want to experience it. Because like there's a difference between lore and story. Obviously, you know, like. Lore is everything that kind of like informs the world, where story is what the game is, what you experience as you play. It's the narrative. It's the you know, it's the characters. It's the motivations. It's the way the things progress and everything. I think Dark Souls is a very simple story. It has a story that is very like straightforward. But the lore is kind of what makes it interesting. Like there's a lot going on behind the scenes that you're not privy to unless you read the item descriptions. And then you can talk to the NPCs and can, you know, learn their stories and do side quests and stuff. I don't want to go too crazy with Dark Souls. Mostly I just want to showcase the fundamentals of the game, and I want to showcase what I have to say. I'm playing the game a little bit fast and loose. I'm not going through absolutely everything. I'll at least go through what I deem important. But you know, I'm probably not going to talk to most NPCs. I'm probably not going to fight every single mini boss. You know, but I will show what I think is important and why I think the game succeeds in many ways and where it fails. See, now that this guy ambushed you, now every time you look at a plant, you start to wonder, oh, is this plant dangerous? Is this plant dangerous? And you can kind of tell they have a specific model, and usually the way the plant model will be integrated into the level, you'll be able to tell. But once again, like, it's something that I appreciate about Dark Souls, that it really makes you cautious about your exploration, and it makes you look around. And by making you kind of slow down and look around, not only do you pay more attention to the pretty nice art direction, and but you also soak in the game. You notice the little details. That's how you absorb the lore. That's how you absorb information required to progress. That's how you kind of make sense of the game itself. by requiring you to be cautious, it also makes you observant. And by making you observant, you are able to kind of make sense, make decisions, use information to guess things and take risks and kind of proceed. And what's interesting in Dark Souls is that I feel like there's two ways to see. Look, you can kind of obviously tell it's an ambush. You have this guy, you have this guy, you have this guy. It's the head of the plants that you saw earlier. They're hard to hit though, because not every weapon hits downwards, so it's hard to hit when. If I had a broadsword or something, there we go. If you had a broadsword, you'd be able to hit down, because one of the attacks of the broadsword kind of hits downwards. But the S-Stock is very linear in its attacks. It hits more in 2 dimensions than it hits in 3 dimensions. See here, I was observant and I'm able to come across unscathed, and that's how I feel about a lot of Dark Souls, and it's kind of what I like about games in general. Often, at least what I like is when based on observation, information, and game knowledge based on gathering information and playing the game, you're able to formulate plans and execute them properly. Like this guy, for example, you can tell. Now you're able to recognize these guys. And notice that until there was that one ambush guy, you didn't really encounter many ambushes. But then as soon as you have one ambush, now it's just like a lot of ambushes. They introduce it, and then now you know you can expect it. And they introduce it in a pretty safe environment. I like this guy because he kind of looks like vines, so you might not notice that it's a snake, and then you'll you might come here and get attacked. Yeah, what I like in games a lot is when you're able to formulate plans based on information that you can glean at a glance, and then it's all a matter of executing the plan that you had in mind. Now, the execution is going to be the hardest part because it depends on many factors. It depends on how good you are at the game. It depends on the mechanics. It depends on how skilled you are. It depends on if the controls are responsive and the tools you have at your disposal and everything. But based on information, based on your tools, based on observation, and based on game knowledge of what is and isn't possible, usually you're able to kind of make a good like a good guess, and then it's about executing that. And I like that. I like that if you're smart enough and you're clever enough, you're able to get through most of the game, provided you're able to execute your tactics, you're able to get through the game without taking much damage or struggling too much. And I think that's why when people say Dark Souls is hard, I understand what they mean. There's of course some level of difficulty in how you interact with the game. You know, like I said, there's a lot of commitment to what you do, and the game feels a little bit slow and clunky, but it's part of the experience. And there's it might be obtuse about certain mechanics, but once you kind of understand the framework of the game and you understand how the game works, you're able to very easily formulate plans and execute them. You're able to observe and guess, and you really feel like an adventurer. You know, you feel like you're using the resources you have at your disposal and the knowledge that you have at your disposal to really execute what you want. Like for example here, I don't have a ranged weapon, so I can't really deal much damage to this guy. I just have to kind of dodge and hope for the best, but he's not too hard to avoid. But you know, if I had projectiles, maybe I could attack it from far away, but I don't have any projectiles, so I kind of just have to wait and do the best I can once it lands. Sometimes it lands quickly, sometimes it doesn't land quickly. It's a bit awkward, obviously. Alright, get over here. It's gonna blow up. You can tell. If you played a video game before. I'm gonna throw stuff at it. See, this is like, you know, I don't really use projectiles. I think the fire bombs are kind of useless. However, against this guy, where I have no other way of hitting him, why not use my fire bombs, you know? You're an adventurer, use what you have. What? If you have a bow and arrow, use a bow and arrow. If you have spells, use spells. But, you know, oh my god. But I don't have much, so I have to use what I have. Which in this case is my fire bomb. So I ran out of fire bomb. I'm pretty sure I have nothing else that's a ranged weapon anymore. Yeah, I don't have anything else. And in this case, you know, of course I've been using I'm using my dodge, but you can kind of, if you're kind of aligned with the movement properly, you can avoid most of the attacks by running away or by just moving side to side like this. You don't have to dodge. It's really a question of like positioning and you know, it's a slow-paced fight, but it's a memorable fight. The music's beautiful, the enemy's beautiful. It's very like, it's a good vibe, as the kids say. Does it feel not dynamic? A little bit. I'm kind of bored right now, but it's definitely a memorable fight. I just feel a bit bored because I don't have any options, but that's my kind of, it's the consequences of how I decide to express my character. You know, you have to consider that, whoa, I've never seen this attack before. Usually I kill it way faster than that. Pretty wild. I've never seen that big explosion before. No, you know, it's like right now, do I think I'm gonna get hit, or am I good enough to dodge? Because if I think I'm gonna get hit, maybe I should maybe I should eat a humanity and heal. But yeah, it's you know, maybe I should have brought a bow, but how was I supposed to know? I didn't know I was gonna fight this boss. Well, I did, but you know, if you're playing the game the first time, you won't necessarily know. But now you're like, oh, well, this boss is it's kind of annoying to fight if you're only a melee user, so maybe I'll go find a bow and use a bow and try to attack it with my bow, or maybe I'll try to go find projectiles and use projectiles to fight that boss. You know, that's what an adventurer would do. You would use the information at your disposal to defeat the enemy. But instead I'm gonna be very hard-headed and I'm just gonna go fight it again. Because I'm pretty sure it's weak to lightning and I have my lightning with me, so I'll be able to take care of it. Once again, you know, I do it to some degree. I think everybody does it to some degree, but you can run away from almost every enemy, which I think is good and bad. I think it's bad because one of the main ways you interact with the world of the game is through combat, and I think combat is one of the pillars of this game. It's the tense, kind of vibe-based, kind of fight for your life combat. But at the same time, part of the game is also exploration and making decisions that will help you live. But running away is one way to do that, but there are other more interesting, more dynamic ways to do so, but you know, you can just run past things. You know, the first time I fought this guy, I never thought about the fact that they could be artificial or be robots, but the weird gear that spins behind it is clearly like a piece of machinery or something. Like, it doesn't look natural. Everything else about it looks kind of semi-natural. I mean, if you suspend your disbelief because you've been seeing all these strange creatures, like, you can kind of believe that something like this would exist, but there's the weird spinning thing on its back and it makes you wonder what it is. This attack I find to be the hardest to avoid, but mostly because it's hard to tell maybe it's because I have no depth perception, but I find it hard to tell like the angle at which the attack comes depending on how far the monster is. Like, it comes at an angle, of course, but I feel like sometimes I feel like I'm placed at the right angle and it's not well, well, that's just a matter of waiting for it to land again. Hopefully I'll get it. I'll be able to do another round on it with my lightning, but we'll see about that. Am I being as smart as I say you should be when you play this game? Probably not. Like I said, you know, a good adventurer would go get a bow or go get like projectiles to fight the enemy, but I'm a bad adventurer, you know. I'm not very clever. No, I'm just hard-headed. You know, it's been 2 hours or so since I've been playing. I think probably gonna end soon, just because I've slightly run out of things to say. My brain's kind of oversaturated a little bit with Dark Souls, but I feel like I've said a lot, and my plan is to rewatch what I've just done, and by rewatching it, I'll take notes of what I remembered. Because, you know, so you're in a different mindset when you think about something and when you actually experience it. So I'll take some notes and I'll think about it and I'll see if I have more talking points. But otherwise, you know, I'll play through the game, and when things come up, I'll talk about them. That's the plan. But, you know, it's because the problem is I know the game well enough that I can talk about the future. In the sense, like, I can talk about what's going to happen, or like future mechanics. And I don't know if it's a good idea to talk about them before they're introduced, but I'll at least bring them up, and then when they get introduced, I'll try to talk about them more in depth. But it's like I have a lot to say about this game, but I've said a lot of the main points already. And then it's just about kind of refining my points as I play the game and showing concrete examples. But I think it's sort of about like showing off encounters, showing off areas, showing about like what I think the game does well, what I'm not sure the game does well, what I'm not sure if it's executed in an ideal way for what they're trying to do, things like that. For example, the fact that I'm running away from the enemies, does that mean that the combat's not fun enough to warrant me doing it? Does it mean that these enemies are tedious, I don't want to fight them? Does that mean they're badly designed enemies? Not necessarily. I think there's so much like it can mean a lot of things that I want to run away from the game. I mean, of course, there's also the fact that I played this game so much that some encounters I find generally uninteresting or unfun, so I don't want to do them. Now, yes, it's true that I find some encounters to be unfun. Wow. But yeah, I find some encounters to be unfun, but I think that they're all memorable. I don't think you should always have fun in a game. I think it's important to sometimes not have fun, or to struggle, or to I don't think games are you know, you're entitled to the free dopamine of playing video games, so to speak. I think sometimes the negative emotions you feel when playing games are important, and I feel that sometimes, you know, the struggle in experiencing something, or having to go through something that you find dull, or, you know, it changes your perspective, so that when you do things that aren't dull, it's different. You know, like, it's why fighting a boss versus fighting regular weak enemies isn't the same, and why usually bosses are a highlight is because bosses showcase mechanics. They showcase you know, having to use every tool at your disposal. Bosses are usually a unique encounter. It's not repetitive. It's designed more tightly and everything. But it also shows that, like, when you fight enemies, if you fight the same enemies often, it changes the context in which you fight them. Can also change the way the fight feels. So it shows that, like, for example, fighting these guys, they're very stretchy and they have a good mobility. So fighting them in tight spaces is harder than fighting them in open spaces. So in open spaces, they usually put more of them, or they pair them with other enemies. For example, this guy. This guy's a mini boss. You can fight him anytime you want, or you can just run past him. They put him in a way where it's pretty easy to run past him, but if you don't want you to, you don't have to. And pretty tough. You know, he's made of stone, so obviously he wouldn't take much damage from your attacks. And he's so big that when he attacks you, his tail will also hit you, and you'll take damage even if you're behind him. So you have to care more about your positioning. But they also put him in a big enough area that you can kind of use positioning and run away from his attacks. But they put him in an area that's kind of cluttered with broken pillars and stuff, so you can't just willy-nilly run around everywhere. And the other thing too is they put him inside a building, so you can kind of just leave the building and heal and come back. So it's a very kind of easy, open-ended kind of. Oh, you know, you don't have to fight him if you don't want to, but you can. And it's kind of in a, you could say it's like in a, it's a safe encounter. You know, it's not like you have to fight this guy to progress, and it's not like even if he's optional, he's put in a situation where he's harder than he is. It's actually a pretty safe encounter, so it makes you decide if you want to fight him or not. And I think it's a very memorable fight because it's right next to the blacksmith, and it's a Titanite demon, so it's a demon made of upgrade materials for the blacksmith. And you fight him in this like dilapidated, I don't know what this is, like a church looking building, or like the basement of something. And he's in a crossroads between two different parts of the game, so you also remember him because of that. Because even if you run past him all the time, you remember him. You remember this guy. You're like, this is the guy that I have to run past every time I want to go to Darkroot Garden. You know, this is the guy that is made of stone that is pretty tough. And I also think it's a good introduction to these demons, because these demons are optional. You can, oh my god, sniped me. You can fight these guys often throughout the game, but they're always optional. You never have to fight one. So the fact that the first one you encounter is optional, I guess you could say like teaches you something about those guys, that even though it's not necessarily like a, you can't necessarily make that judgment. That guy is optional, therefore probably in the future there are optional guys like that, but it's not necessarily something you can say with certainty. But I feel like, once again, if you have game literacy, like game knowledge, usually mini bosses are recurring, whereas bosses are not. Also, like, he doesn't have like a boss health bar, you know. He doesn't go like Titanite demon with like the music and everything. Yeah, I'll go kill those guys because I like their weapon, so if it drops, I'll use it. No weapon. I mean, I know people don't really interact with me when I do videos because I don't get a lot of viewers, and my viewers are like a lot of them are people that I know, other friends, so usually they'll talk to me either in real life or they'll talk to me on Discord, so people don't leave YouTube comments usually. But if you think that I should pay attention more to the story and not just how it's told, and you want me to talk to NPCs more and read item descriptions more, I don't mind doing it. Because I have stuff to say about that too. Obviously, it's part of the game, so obviously I have stuff to say about it. But I'm more of a mechanics kind of guy. I'm more of a, how does the game make you feel, and how does it, what is the game doing and how does it do that? That's how I usually look at games. So, you know, while story and NPCs is a way to make you feel things and does affect your experience, I think games, by virtue of being games, what's the most important about games is their mechanics, their moment-to-moment gameplay, the decisions you have to make as you play, which decisions you make while you play is something that's very open-ended, you know, like not every decision is like, do you want to do this, yes or no? It's sometimes it's like, what weapon do you want to use? How far do you move before you retreat? Do you retreat at all? In what order do you do levels? Things like that, you know. There's so many ways to define, you know, decision making in video games that people don't really consider, because for them it's like, oh well, I'm just playing the game, I'm not making decisions. But everything you do is a decision, whether it's what levels you allocate, which is a literal decision, but also how do you approach this enemy? Do you parry him? Do you block him? Do you dodge him? Do you use your humanity for something or not? How do you tackle the dragon? Do you even decide to tackle the dragon? Do you just run past enemies? There's so many things you can do, so many ways to do them. I think that's decision making as well, and Dark Souls is pretty good at moment-to-moment decision making, and it's because you're observant when you play this game. It's because the game is difficult enough and harsh enough to make you think about what you're doing as you're doing it, because you can't just turn your brain off and play. You have to kind of consider things. Even me, you know, I thought I could turn my brain off and just talk about this game while I play it and not really pay attention to the game itself, because oh, I know Dark Souls so well, like yeah, it's gonna be the easiest thing ever. But turns out talking about the game as you play it actually does make it harder. I took the game for granted, and I got punished. You know, I was getting getting messed up. I will say this, some things I do take for granted, like I should have spoken about this, but this encounter here, the two guys plus the one guy across the bridge with dudes shooting firebombs at you from up there, that's like, it's a pretty hard bottleneck for a lot of people who start playing Dark Souls. What the hell? It's pretty like tough bottleneck. Like I remember when I first played Dark Souls, and you know, you have your unupgraded weapon and you don't really know how to play, and you just made it to this bonfire over here and you're still learning the mechanics and everything. I spent a lot of time trying to fight. I was like, okay, I'm gonna take this guy down, this guy down. I'm gonna run past the bridge, and I kind of bait the guys with them being like firebombed, and it kind of sucks. Now I just go in here and I fight all of them. But the first time I played this game, I thought, man, this is actually like pretty clever. You know, these guys are pretty weak, but they have one shielded guy who's a bit stronger, and you're getting assaulted by the firebombs. So you kind of want to stay inside to not get hit by the firebombs, but by staying inside, you're kind of confined and you're being surrounded by the enemies. It's a pretty nice encounter. I would say it's like one of the better encounters in Undead Burg, like mini encounters, so to speak. And I think it's a nice encounter from like a design standpoint, less so than from like how do I say, like an artistic standpoint. I think this entire little section of Undead Burg is very nice, but that one encounter I think is the nicer one from like a game design standpoint. Like, how do you create a dynamic encounter through like varied enemy composition and enemy placement? I think as far as like individual enemies go, I would say like the hardest things to deal with at this stage in the game is the shield guys, because they block a lot. So if you're unfamiliar with how to break shield, or you're unfamiliar with movement, so you struggle to backstab people or whatever, like it's a bit harder to deal with those shield guys, shield guys with the spears. But it also teaches you that if you ever get a spear or a shield, you can actually just attack from behind your shield and be safe. So in a way, you know, it kind of teaches you, because while the enemies don't behave exactly like a player does, there is enough similarities between the enemies and the player that you can kind of guess a few things from the way, you can learn a few things from the enemies. All right, rematch. Much more damage now. So once again, you know, this guy's optional. I just kind of went back to fight him because I want to get to the lower end of the brick door, but I don't want to cross the bridge with the fire because it's too unreliable for me to deal with. So I'm going through here, and see how, you know, earlier I was kind of dancing around him a lot because I was oh nice, I was dancing around him a lot because I wasn't dealing much damage, so I was less confident about fighting him, not because I was scared of getting hit or whatever, because like as you can see here, I pretty much dodged all his attacks no problem, but it's just like being weaker makes you play less confidently, and playing less confidently means that you know, you lose your cool. And like I said, against a silent demon, losing your cool is actually the #1 way to die in Dark Souls.
Ah, hello. You don't look hollow, far from it. I am Solaire of Astora, an adherent of the Lord of Sunlight. Now that I am undead,
His armor makes him look fat, so it makes him look like a jolly fat guy.
birthplace of Lord Gwyn, to seek my very own son. You find that strange? Well, you should. No need to hide your reaction. I get that look all the time. Oh, aha. So I didn't scare you. I have a proposition, if you have a moment. The way I see it, our fates appear to be intertwined. In a land brimming with hollows, could that really be mere chance? So what do you say? Why not help one another on this lonely journey?
I find it interesting that it defaults to no. Because in a lot of games, you know, until you actually have an input, it won't choose yes or no. It'll just be a blank input. And then when you choose, when you move your cursor, then it'll go to yes or no. Or maybe it should default to yes. The fact that it defaults to no, I find interesting. I wonder if it's because if you just button mash, you'll just say no and you'll make him sad. But you can just talk to him again and it's fine. But I do wonder, like, why it defaults to no. Because like I believe in certain encounters in this game, it defaults to yes. And I don't know if it's arbitrary or if there's like a certain meaning to it. So here he's teaching you how to interact with the multiplayer mechanics, but I can't because the servers are dead.
Of course, we are not the only ones engaged in this, but I am a warrior of the sun. Spot my summon signature easily by its brilliant aura. If you miss it, you must be blind.
I like this little section. You know, he's on a balcony, got his back standing away from you, so in a way he doesn't feel like a threat, because like if he was facing you, you know, and he was waiting for you, maybe he'd feel like ominous. But now he's facing away from you. He's looking at the sun. He's looking. You know, he's bathed in sunlight. He's looking at the beautiful vista outside. Like, it's a pretty nice little memorable encounter. And I think this introduction to Solaire is one of the reasons why people like him so much. Is like, even if you didn't talk to him and he wasn't like a jolly guy, I think just having him stand there like this, you know, his armor is kind of funny looking. He looks like a jolly fat guy. He's got his back standing to you. He doesn't even have his weapons out. You know, he's not holding a weapon, and he's staring at the sun. It's very like you're very accepting of him at a first glance. And you know, they didn't have to do it through a cutscene or to manipulate you in any way. Like, it's really just through, because in Dark Souls, which is something I appreciate, there's not that many cutscenes, and there's not that many times when like control is taken away from you. So the way you interact with the game really is through combat and exploration. So the fact that, you know, you encounter Solaire, how do they make? I wonder if you can hear Kos when he meows. Kos is meowing right now. I'm gonna go play with him soon. I just want to open a shortcut and then I'll go play with Kos and call it a day. Kos, hello. He's walking around my microphone. To finish what I was saying about Solaire, like the fact that they place him in a certain way so that you feel safe when you see him, and they don't do it by taking control away from you. They don't do it by, you know, showing him in a good light through a cutscene. They don't do it by making so you can't draw your weapon when you're near him. The fact that they just do it through like visuals, and they do it through like his placement and how he's framed in the level and how he's framed in the game, I think it's kind of well made. You know, there's a lot of times where I find that the NPCs in this game are are placed in such a way that like it kind of puts you in a certain mindset. And I don't know if it's like, I don't know who's in charge of that. Like, is that environment director? Is that level designer? Is that like the narrative designer or whatever? Like, I don't know who's in charge of that, but it's something that I kind of appreciate, is how a lot of things in Dark Souls are very deliberately placed or framed in a certain way to either make them memorable or to make you feel a certain way, so that even if it's not necessarily like the most mind-blowing encounter, it's not the most important NPC, it still kind of sticks in your mind in some way. And that's why I'm saying, like, you know, it's really about the Dark Souls, it's really about the vibes. The combat is more about the vibes than it is about the mechanical depth. You know, the dialogue is also very vibe based. Like they didn't hire typical voice actors. They hired like theater actors and people, so the performances are very different from what you usually hear in a video game, and they have these very like weird deliveries that kind of add to a strange, uncanny vibe that keeps you on your toes even when you're talking to nice NPCs. There's a lot of things that in Dark Souls that it's all like vibe based. It's a very vibe based game, but how did they sell that vibe? It's really through like the way you interact with the game, through the mechanics, and through framing and visuals, which I think is important because games are a visual medium, and games are, but more importantly, games are a interactive gameplay based medium, and Dark Souls knows enough about gameplay and knows enough about how to use mechanics and how to, even if it's very vibe based, how to use the fundamentals of, you know, like kind of arcadey style or like, you know, kind of gamey, video gamey type mechanics to really sell to you what they're trying to do with the game. And I think it's very efficient, and I hope I get to talk about it more in depth next time. So anyway, thanks for watching. I don't know how I'm gonna separate this yet, because I've been playing for 2 hours straight, 2 hours and a half straight. And I don't know if I'm just gonna release a 2.5 hour long video, or if I'm gonna break it apart into pieces. You'll probably know because it'll be uploaded. But yeah, it's one of those things where you know, I feel more comfortable now talking in front of the camera and everything, so I think I'll try to do more of this. I hope it was interesting. I feel like there wasn't that much downtime. I feel like I spoke a lot. Let me know what you think, and go play some video games, please. They're fun and they're interesting.